Okay, Brix. You know, I have to keep looking at your book because I have to think. I don't know, it's Brix Start Smith or Brix Smith Start.
Smith.
Don't get a name wrong. Don't get it's Brix.
Everyone
Smith
gets it wrong.
Start, do they?
Yeah, but I still go by Brix Smith. You know,
Yeah.
I'm like a shark that collects scars, so I keep the last names.
Okay. About 2.5 years ago, I went to the Deaf Institute and there was a launch of Steve Hanley's book, excellent book, about this time in the fall. And they played a set of fall songs. I think John Robb played Totally Wired, controversially, that night. And Brix, you were in the crowd, weren't you? And did something stir at that point? Because
Well, you have to understand, like, basically, I had lost contact from everyone from the fall for 18 years. I had no idea what became of them, and I had gone on and done other things and put music behind me. And so, when Steve Hanley wrote his book, The Big Midweek, his publisher sent me a copy, a proof, to read. And as I read it, it was like so crazy because I'd been on the road with him for so many years, and I never knew what he was thinking. And I realized I was a really big part of this band, and I should stand up and sort of own what I did, really, instead of denying it. So it came time for the launch that you were talking about, and I was so nervous to go up there because I hadn't seen them for 18 years, none of them, and it was like my stomach was churning, you know. And so I begged Marcia, who was in the fall with us, to go with me, and we went together, we did a road trip, and we got up there, and I don't know what I expected. I think I expected everybody to be still miserable and battle-scarred from our days. You know, it was quite a hard band to be in. But when I got there, it was completely the opposite. Everybody was happy, thriving, families, kids. It was the loveliest thing, and honestly, it was like the closing of a circle, and it was just unbelievable. So that night, Steve Hanley put together a band of a bunch of different musicians, including John Robb, and they did some cover versions of songs, including, I think they did Totally Wired, but they did Mr. Pharmacist, and this is what I remember most. I don't really remember that much except Mr. Pharmacist. Something inside me, after like, whatever, 18 years of not playing or even touching a guitar, I swear to God, it shot up like a bolt of electricity from my vagina to my brain, and I just wanted to stand up and kick the guitarist off the stage and grab the guitar and start playing. And that's when I knew I'd got my mojo back.
you say then you haven't played guitar for 15 years?
Yeah. I didn't touch it.
Why?
I had a breakdown. I was destroyed after the second time I was in the fall. I just couldn't do it. I couldn't physically do it. I couldn't mentally do it. I was done. And it didn't feel good anymore. I couldn't write. I couldn't find the stream of inspiration. And then I imagined that a woman in her 50s would just look so gross on stage with a guitar. And I thought, I don't know what I thought, but I had to completely stop it and reinvent myself as somebody else. And that's when the fashion thing came into it.
Okay. I mean, I know you're there. You're in a nice life. You're a lovely husband, lovely business, fashion business. You're on TV, nice dogs, all this sort of stuff. And then suddenly there's a hankering to go back to playing live. And then with Brix and the Extricated, when you started, was the idea to play fall songs or just play the songs that you wrote? What was the idea?
So, never in my wildest dreams did I ever imagine I would be back in a band. But what happened was, after that night, the night of Steve Hanley's book launch, and somebody else was playing my part, I said to him, "Why didn't you ask me to play?" And he said, "Oh my God, we never thought you'd do it." And actually, what they didn't know is weird stuff had been happening to me, and I had secretly been playing again at home in my house after 15 years. So I said, "I would have, I'm playing again." And he said, "Well, why don't we just get together for fun and jam?" So we got together, and I said, yeah, let's write, it's fun, you know. So we got together and plugged in, and we both got goosebumps, and there was something going on, you know, musically, that it was just incredible. And then we decided, for fun, to put together a few other musicians, including Steve Trafford, Jason Brown, and Paul Hanley, Steve's brother, the drummer. And 4 of us had been in the fall before. So we put it together for fun in the garage, and somebody got wind of it, gave us a gig at the Ruby Lounge. I was scared out of my mind.
Really?
It was,
What was your basic idea? Was it to play mainly fall songs that you've been involved in?
yeah, only the songs we wrote. We didn't want to touch anything we didn't write. But it sort of came to pass in my brain that as a songwriter, as songwriters, we had the right to interpret our songs in our own way. And once, Mark's voice is so iconic and he's so incredible. And you can't, when you listen to a fall song, you really can't imagine somebody else singing it, That's almost sacrilegious. But once we started doing it, I actually understood where the nugget of inspiration came from because I had co-written it with him. And second of all, I'm a woman and I'm going to put my own reflection on it, And I thought, if anyone's going to be able to do this, I'm going to fucking be able to do this. And it felt really good, and I was like, whatever, I'm going to put my head in the lion's mouth and just do it. And so it was only originally songs that we had written, and or that had been kicked to the curb, mind you. 30 years they're lying in the dirt. He's not playing them, nobody's playing them. They're classic songs that deserve an airing again, for sure. There's people that hadn't heard it in their lifetime, And then new songs that we were writing together, so we were moving on. But this was still just for fun. But, when you love what you do, and you have a passion, and it becomes your fuel for life, you manifest things, so it's real.
How did you feel when Mark referred to extricated as subhuman? I mean, is that just a Mark thing?
I don't.
Do you accept that as it, or did it upset you? I don't know.
No, here's the thing. If Mark Smith is miserable, he is the cause of his own misery, not me. So, I have no control over the man. I have no control over anything in this world except my own feelings. So I've reached for better feeling things. When somebody has a go at me, it's coming from them. It's their own problem. It's actually nothing to do with me. It doesn't feel good when someone says unkind things about you, but at the same time, I actually know that it's really not about me.
It did upset you.
Well, I'm not really, but I mean, doesn't feel good. It's not like you're such a lovely, warm human being. I know he's fucked up. To be
perfectly honest, I could start a band and play all fall songs. Anyone can do it. You can play what you like. It's a free world. It's not Mark Smith to tell you what you can and cannot play.
No.
And apart from the fact that you wrote those songs anyway, so I mean,
they wouldn't exist without me.
Yeah.
And also, the other thing to keep in mind is when people heard that I was writing this book, they thought that I was going to go after him hammer and tong. But that's not the way it is. This book is written with love and gratitude. It's very, very honest. It's, kind of unflinchingly honest, sometimes brutal in places. But it is written with love and with the greatest respect. And it's dedicated to Mark, and it's dedicated to everyone with whom I've had difficult relationships in my life, because if it weren't for those difficult relationships, no matter how hard they were, I wouldn't be the person I am today. So, for me, life is about a duality. Yeah, you get it.
I get it.
You get it. And so, from the darkest places is where the spark of creation comes. And you have to, I've suffered from depression on and off my whole life. I still do, but I know that the saying, this too shall pass, that everything flows, everything moves. One day may be bad, but the next day is probably going to be better, or it might be worse, but it will change and it will move. And from these dark periods is where you get this desire to shove yourself out of it and reach further.
Yeah, okay. You're an LA girl, aren't you? Now, the passage in this book that refer to LA seems to be written from after you'd left LA, that you're feeling homesick. I don't know. That's just that's grassy. You went to Chicago, and you're writing about Chicago, but you're writing back about LA being a lovely, warm place full of lovely scents and aromas and beautiful sunshine. Being driven up by your mother up Pacific Coast Highway in a yellow Porsche. Sounds pretty idyllic, but was it? Was LA idyllic in your early years? I'm not sure after reading that, because it's a troubled family. Your mother and your father split up and all that. I don't want to go into that, but they did. And you're obviously a troubled girl, but at the same time you're in this fantastic place. And at some point you're wrenched from it and taken to cold Chicago to a haunted house. But you're right, that's where you write best about LA, from that position in your head of being in Chicago. So I mean, what was it like? Was LA a nice childhood, or what? Or is it the Swan thing where everyone's like this, but breathe underneath the surface, they're all over? I don't know. Was it a typical LA childhood?
I don't know what a typical LA childhood is. All I know is that I was an only child, and my parents were, my mother had to work all the time, so I almost never saw her, and my father was, I don't know how many of you have read the book? Anyone? Right, so yeah, my father was kind of a monster, but still. So I spent a lot of time on my own as a child, as a young child. And I was a very intuitive child. And, to me, because I lived in the world of my own making, I lived in my own imagination, in my own universe. And everything I saw there was beautiful. It was magical and beautiful. It smelled gorgeous. The light filtered down. I could see different dimensions. It was incredible. And LA at the time was in the 60s, so it was a time of huge optimism and change, and people really looking forward towards the future. Anything was possible. The music, the soundtrack to my childhood was like all the sort of like the Mamas and the Papas and Crosby, Stills and Nash and all the California sort of psychedelic canyon folk bands, and it was quite incredible. And of course it was the time when the astronauts landed on the moon, and love and peace, and it was just idyllic. And so I kept myself in this bubble there because of mostly what was going on with my family. I mean, there was the Vietnam War too, that was really bad. I remember writing a letter to President Nixon, stop the war. Yeah, anyway, let's not talk about presidents. Right, yeah, just had to get that elephant out the room. So yeah, I don't know, I live, part of my technique for getting through life, if you've read the book, is to live in denial. And if something doesn't feel good to me, or a really unhappy thought, or there have been incidences that I describe in the book where really bad things have happened, and I've had to shut them down in my brain in order to move forward. So I guess so in my brain, after I left LA, I always looked at it as to this just idyllic place. Because that was where I lived, in my head there. So when I wrote the book, I wanted to take the reader back there to relive the feelings and the scents and the smells and the stuff.
One of the most evocative pieces in the book is about the pink mansion. Do you ever read a piece about that?
Do you all want me to read to you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, they do.
Okay, so I've got my entire transcript of the whole book here, so I have every chapter. You can request anything, but...
Don't read the whole thing.
No. We'd be here for like 5 days. This chapter is called The Pink Mansion, and it was this, I'll read it, but basically my mom and I lived in this old crumbling mansion in the Hollywood Hills that was pink, and we rented it. It was rented, and we lived with a roommate, because we couldn't afford the whole thing, and it was kind of like sectioned out. It was kind of a big plot of land. So and it was probably the most magical place. The Pink Mansion. It lay nestled between the girding loins of Beechwood Canyon, halfway up the mountain between the sky and the Hollywood sign, encased in its own crumbling, fantastical compound, and surrounded by lush, overgrown gardens. In the decaying remnants of a sumptuous, debauched, and lost Hollywood sat the Pink Mansion. The Pink Mansion was the best house I had ever lived in. My mother and I moved there when I was 6. I remember exactly because Deanne, our housemate, gave me the book, Now We Are 6 by A.A. Milne, for my birthday. The house was so big, we couldn't afford to rent it all, so we had to share it. We split the main part of the house with Deanne, a single woman. We kept it separated into 2 parts, only really coming together in the kitchen. Apart from that, our paths rarely crossed. Above us, on the top floor of the mansion, with their own private entrance, lived a couple. I used to spy on them doing naked yoga. Separate from the house was another building altogether, the guest house, which was also pink. A rock star lived there, Jim. He threw wild parties with much nudity and drug taking. I know because I spied on him too. Jim had washing lines strung between the sycamore and oak trees in his part of the garden in front of the guest house, and hanging on the washing lines were sealed glass jugs filled with colored liquid. They were the colors of the rainbow, and they transfixed me. He also had a vast collection of Playboy magazines taking up half the space in his large living room. I spent a lot of time observing everything and everyone while living in the Pink Mansion. It was truly enchanting, otherworldly environment. The Pink Mansion had extensive mature gardens. The centerpiece of the garden was a cavernous rectangular swimming pool, also pink. In the center of the pool stood a magnificent stone fountain. The fountain was dry. The swimming pool was empty. Its cement was cracked and in disrepair. Slimy, brackish water lay in stagnant puddles at the bottom. I think it had been empty since the 1940s. Very Sunset Boulevard. To even get to the swimming pool, you first had to navigate the maze. The maze was made of hedges, an actual labyrinth. There were entrances at all four corners of the rectangle surrounding the pool, but once you got into the openings, it was hard to find your way to the pool. It was a tricky maze, especially for a 6-year-old who was dwarfed by the towering, overgrown hedges. Branching off from the outside of the hedges were various garden paths. The paths would regularly lead me on my childhood flights of fantasy, and I would spend hours playing in the creepy solitude of the magical garden, letting my mind run free, immersed in a total world of my own making. And riding the paths on one of my many imaginary horses, I would canter around the whole property. My favorite path led to the back of the house, to the walled garden and a koi carp pond. Here was the most sublime patio area. It was accessed from the inside of the mansion, through sliding glass doors which opened off the ballroom. The patio was paved in glittering stones, and to me they looked like they were embedded with crystals. High stone walls engulfed the entire area, which was elliptical. The stone walls were dripping with passion flowers and night-blooming jasmine. The scent was intoxicating. The koi, though, were long gone. Presumably they'd met their maker years ago. The dark wood-paneled ballroom was the scene of some of my greatest childhood productions. Being an only child, I had an inordinate amount of time in which to entertain myself. My favorite game was called Cruise Ship. I'd set out all the occasional chairs in rows, and on one chair I'd put my beloved cat Matilda. My mother and I had rescued her from the street, where we found her shivering and abandoned underneath our car. Next to Matilda, on the other chairs, sat lines of imaginary people, all the passengers on my cruise ship. I'd spend hours serving them drinks and hors d'oeuvres, and then singing and dancing for them. Matilda loved it when I played my child-sized guitar and made up songs for her. The guitar was a present from my father. Matilda was a terrific audience. She even allowed me to drape her relaxed body over my shoulders, pretending she was my fur stole and I was a movie star. My bedroom was crescent-shaped and protruded from an alcove at the front of the house. Back in the golden days of Hollywood, the glory days of the mansion, I suspect my bedroom would have been used as a charming sunroom from which some grand old movie star like Gene Tierney would sit and observe the labyrinth garden. Big curved glass windows looked out over the Hollywood Hills and the incandescent glow of LA at night. Directly in my line of view was the iconic Capitol Records building. It was shaped like a towering stack of records. At Christmas they would put lights on it and it would transform into a giant glittering Christmas tree. I was fascinated by the building, and years later I would go there for a meeting. The A&R team were interested in signing my solo band, Adult Net. I remember walking down the halls and savoring the moment. It felt like I was walking into a storybook. The huge glass panes in my bedroom windows started to pose a problem for me. They made me anxious. It was as if they were actually windows into my imagination. Although they framed the reality of the physical world, somehow, in my mind at least, the physical and imaginary had become one. I had terrible fears that I would wake up and Superman would swoop down from the sky, flattening himself against my window, standing outside on the tiny sill, trying to get in and take me somewhere I didn't want to go. I was worried that he would take me away from my mother, that I wouldn't see her again. But Laura, my mother said, Superman is a good guy. He's here to save you. And besides, he's not real. I didn't see it that way. He looked pretty real to me on TV. I had the real sense as a child that I never really belonged anywhere, as if it all might evaporate in an instant. I felt lonely, like a visitor. I had my first reoccurring dream in that room. I slept on the top bunk of my bunk bed, and each night for weeks, I'd dream I was flying. I would float, fly, and tumble through space, becoming one with the stars in the galaxy. I loved these dreams. They made me feel free. I felt like I would leave my body every night and go on adventures.
You see, the thing is, there's incredibly evocative tales there of LA and everything. We have to get from there. And this is the big thing here, to Prestwich. And it's not an easy transition. I think it started when you moved to Chicago and you went to Vermont, University of Vermont, and you started your first band. Now, tell me the name of your first band. Can I get you Drotzing?
Banda Drotzing, which is Nadsat, which is the language from Clockwork Orange. It means fighting band.
Which spirals back to Manchester, of course. Well, and Steve Burgess. And,
it certainly does.
Well, there you go. There you go. Now, you're writing songs there that would become fall songs before you even knew the fall existed. Something else struck me strange about your book, actually, is that I know that you were introduced to the guitar by one of your people looking after you, guitar, bass guitar, whatever. I don't know. Your musicality, you don't. I don't know how you became such a proficient musician, because I don't get that from this. But I don't get what you do. You lock yourself in your bedroom for it. I know you bought a bass guitar. And played it, and you had a friend called
I'll tell you
Ian
how.
who told you.
I'll tell you how.
Tell me.
I was so in love with music and was so obsessed with it that I fucking willed myself to do that. I just believed in myself so much. I just had the attitude, and it was a weird thing. When I first picked up the bass guitar, it was like an instinctive, natural thing. It was like part of my body. The vibrations of the bass guitar, I just got it. I literally wrote that Adult Nut song, Edie, within 5 minutes of having it. I understood how to weave a melody around the vibrations of the strings. I understood how to structure a song. I was intuitive.
You had no musical past background?
No.
Your family were particularly musical?
No.
Just came out?
It was like, channeled.
Extraordinary. And the band, they played a few gigs, they played a few in that area?
Yeah. We played at school. I went to a college called Bennington College, which is a very small liberal arts college in the woods in Vermont. It's really small. By small, I mean only 600 people, including graduate and undergraduate. And I went there not for music, actually. I went there for literature, for creative writing and theater. And I was in a very small creative writing class, and I will tell you my classmates. It was me, Bret Easton Ellis, Donna Tartt, Jonathan Lethem, and Jill Eisenstadt. All of us in a room.
It's pretty good. Illuminati, that.
It's crazy.
But you went to a place with your friend Lisa called Wax Tracks back in Chicago, it was.
A record store, it's like Rough Trade.
Yeah, like Rough Trade, like a funky, small funky band. And you picked up a copy of Slates by The Fall. Did you know who The Fall were at that point?
I did not, but Lisa did. And we were so obsessed with, I was such an Anglophile, and I love British music. And of course there were loads of bands that had American deals, like big British bands that have big American deals, but we loved looking through the import bins to find the things that were really under the radar, and you'd pay more money for it, but it was so cool. So she pulled out The Fall, Slates by The Fall. She goes, "Oh, have you heard of them?" And I said, "No." And she said, "Oh, they're like the gods of the East Village, Brixton." Because my name was Brixton.
That gets me. From Manchester, obviously I knew The Fall. I knew Mark personally from about 1978. The Fall, they are gods of the East Village. what does that mean?
Well, it means that people like Thurston Moore and that whole sort of like White Column speed trial crowd of the 80s, the Fall was completely revered. They were obsessed with them. So Lisa, coming from New York, had heard of them in this context.
That's extraordinary.
Yeah.
Like in Hazel Grove Youth Club, you know, places like that. It seems really odd. But
In what era?
Within 2 weeks, if you're hearing Slates, and Slates is it's not the easiest album to get, it's a mini album to get into, is it? It's not like a most successful thing. How did you possibly relate to that music as a Californian?
Again, I don't know exactly how, but I'd never heard anything like it when I put it on the turntable. And I was fascinated by the intellectual quality of it because I knew the lyrics were brilliant, but I couldn't decipher what they were. And it was hypnotic and powerful and mesmerizing and ugly and brutal and beautiful and created a soundscape all at once, completely extraordinary and different to anything I'd ever heard. It was unique. And then every time I listened to it, the words said something else in my brain. So it was like a musical Rorschach test. And I thought that it was working multi-levels, and it just resonated with me. And I became pretty much like, I have sort of OCD, certainly with music and food. So I'll like listen to the same thing over and over and over again until I completely get it, completely internalize it. And I'll sometimes eat the same meal over and over again. But don't ask me what I ate today. Thanks. Anyway, so yeah.
I mean, that's fantastic. But within, is it 2 months later or 2 weeks later? I'm not sure. The Fall came to Chicago, isn't it?
2 weeks later.
2 weeks later. 2 weeks
Yeah.
after you heard that, The Fall came to Chicago.
Well, that chapter's called A Date with Fate, because I really believe it's everything led up to that moment. It felt like it was all meant to
So
be.
tell me about that day, going seeing The Fall. What did you think of them when you saw them on stage? I mean, you know, they don't look like any rock band from LA, do they?
No. First of all, from looking at the album, the cover of Slates, right? I'd never seen anything like it because most rock stars and rock bands had massive egos and were posing on the cover of their albums, like, you know, in tight jeans and flipping their hair or whatever. And this was like a blurry photograph of what I thought was like somebody playing a guitar, but the singer's face wasn't on it, no one's face was on it, you didn't know what they looked like. It wasn't like Blondie where they're all lined up, you know, it was totally intriguing. So when I went to see them, they were just like blokes, you know. They were just normal men on stage. There was no posing, no fashion at all, no. It was just pulverizing though. And I remember I was very, very focused in on Steve Hanley because I was a bass player. And he is an extraordinary bass player, and I believe one of the best in the world ever. And so I was really fixated on him, and I remember actually looking at the singer going, oh, he doesn't look like a very nice guy. And you know, so I never expected that I would meet them or anything. I just was pretty much bewitched and transfixed by the music.
And what did you make of Mark on stage? When you saw Mark on stage,
he was awkward, you know. I'd never seen anything like it. His back was to the audience. He had pieces of paper. He was snarling. It was different than anything I'd seen. He wasn't singing. He was like speaking, but it was very powerful. And I could tell the lyrics were incredible, but what they were saying, I didn't know.
I don't know if it's detailed, but you met Mark that night, and what was it about him that you found fascinating? I mean,
he's really smart. He was really, really smart and super, super interesting. And you know, he was just a fascinating character.
What do you talk about?
Oh, God.
I don't know. I wonder.
I wonder too now, looking back. I don't know. You know, I think sometimes people are meant to be together, and I think that I honestly feel that we were meant to come together to write those songs, and that we were, for that time, an amazing partnership for many different reasons. And I truly, truly loved him. I truly did. I won't lie. And he, I'm sure, truly loved me.
Okay. LA girl in Chicago, Wisconsin, Chicago, coming to Manchester. You land in Manchester, you come to Piccadilly Station, you're picked up in a taxi by Mark, meets you in a taxi. takes you up Berry New Road. It ain't Pacific Coast Highway, is it?
Hardly.
What on earth did you make of it? I mean...
You know, there's two ways to look at it. First of all, I did feel like completely an alien. You know, I had no preconceptions of what Manchester was like. There was no way for me to really know. Of course, it was before the internet.
Did you know, by the way? Did you know about Manchester before when you were in Lloyd? Had you heard of it before?
I'd heard of it because there was a song in the musical Hair.
Yeah.
That was like Manchester, England, England across the Atlantic Sea. Yeah. And I think the Bee Gees had a Manchester song.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I knew about the Hacienda. I knew about. New Order was. Joy Division had been my favorite band for years. That was my probably first biggest inspiration of playing was Hookie's playing.
Okay, so you're in a taxi. Mark's with the taxi. You're going up Berry New Road. What do you think? What are you thinking? Strange ways on one side.
Well, I think people say to me, "What the hell did you imagine?" And I think this is what honest to God, like I'd been to London and I'd been to like outside London, Oxford, and I think I imagined cobblestone streets and ivy-covered cottages. You know, because it was outside of London and it was up north, and you know, I think I might have, yeah. And so when we were driving down, and Mark said, "Look, look, there's my favorite place, Boddington's Brewery," and I'm like, "Oh," and he goes, "There's Strange Ways Prison," and I was like, "Ugh, it looks so horrible." And then he was like, "There's the Guardian printing plant, which he won an architecture award," and he was really proud. He's super proud to be a Northerner. I didn't understand about North versus South.
Did you feel sort of ghosts in the air and things, and bad things have happened in this area and stuff like that? You know? Did it feel like a dark place?
Yeah, it felt like a dark place.
Yeah.
It was a strange energy. It was first of all, it was very gray. And you could almost like look at the buildings and think bad things happened in those buildings. But here's the thing. I was moving over here to play music. I was living with the man that I loved. I was on this great, wonderful adventure. And I would have to get my head around it. Okay, it wasn't where I come from. Okay, it wasn't the style of which I was brought up in. But I was a grafter and a hard worker, and the guy I was with loved it, and he was passionate about it, so I was going to learn to love it too. And finally, now I would say now that half my heart is Mancunian. Manchester's been so good to me. And but in the first day that I got here, it was a little bit of a culture shock.
Well, it would be, but what you said there, you said something there. I mean, LA is known as like the city of know-how, a city of like people who work hard. People work hard in LA. People work hard in Manchester. So maybe there's a connection. I don't know. But you ended up at Mark's flat. A flat I knew very well at Retro Road. And what were your first impressions as you walked in?
The very first impression was it was an old rectory, so I assumed that he had the whole building. He was, a musician. I didn't understand how hard. You see like so many rock stars and people like that, and they like live this sumptuous, fabulous life. But I didn't understand like the hard, gritty grafting of the indie band, and like we lived hand to mouth. We gigged for food, and we would stretch our songs to 9 minutes long to get more money from a peel session. So I saw this rectory, and I thought he lived there, but he only lived in one small flat at the top, and next to him lived a woman who ran a knocking shop next door. And it was like, pretty much impoverished, really. But so what?
From a Stockport perspective, as a middle-class person from Stockport, I actually aspired to that, and you came down to it.
Well, everybody has a different perspective, but to me, I came from a house that had a working refrigerator, and an actual shower, and hot water that you didn't have to flick a switch for.
Tell us about the fridge.
So we got there, and I'm looking around the house, and I'm going, well, it's got a nice view, whatever. And then he said, do you want a cup of tea? And I said, yeah, I'd love one. And then I looked in the kitchen, and the kitchen was smaller than this stage, half of this stage. It was half of the stage. And there was a small white cube on the floor that looked like a white cardboard box, but it wasn't. And I assumed that was the fridge, and he's making the tea, and I said, oh, I'll get the milk, and I opened the cube, and it was empty and cold. And I said, oh God, where do you keep the milk? And he said, out the window. And then he lifted up the window, and there was a half pint of milk, a packet of Danish back bacon, some Hovis white bread. Yeah, and I thought, you know, how resourceful.
Considering that you had a walk-in fridge basically in your old house in Chicago, and
Yeah, I did.
It must have been a story in the shop.
Well, here's the thing. You know, I am a person who always tries to see the positive in everything. I don't think there's any point in wallowing in anything. So I will just turn everything and reframe it. So instead of saying, fuck, he doesn't even have a fridge, I would say, how resourceful. And that is how I live my life. And that's what this book is about.
Good. Now, you're joining the fall.
Yes.
What was it like, your first practice? Well, how did the band treat you? What did they think? I mean, it's a band with, let's say, an unusual dynamic at the best of times. What was it like going to your first rehearsal? You must be terrified.
Well, here's the thing. You know, so I had met them when they were in America, and they knew me a little bit, and I never intended to be in the fall. You know, the feeling was that I was going to come over here and do a solo project, which ended up being Adult Net, and Mark was going to produce it and be like the Svengali. And so the band were super easygoing with me. You know, I think there were a few raised eyebrows, but no one let it show. But really, I wasn't nervous, I have to say. Playing with them in public, yes, the first time, but practicing with them, no, because it was just so great to be able to play with these guys.
What was your first gig with the Fall?
I can't remember. I probably blocked it out.
How did you fit in musically with the Fall?
Well,
Did you go to a different place?
Okay, so look, I completely, because I love the Fall and respected them so much and had listened to that record so much, I was very, very careful of how to tread with them. I didn't want to be the blonde American woman that shoves herself at the front of the stage and takes over. I didn't want to take away anything from what they created. I only wanted to enhance it by putting in little tiny leads and infectious things that would put like light to the shadow of their canvas. And so I was very careful and very respectful. And once they started using songs that I wrote, then it became a lot easier because my whole integral personality would be woven into it, and it was a much more easy canvas for me to paint on. But at every time, I was super careful because I knew my head was on the chopping block, and I loved what they did, and I didn't have a huge ego.
Was it a personal thing also, because it's not just playing music, but you're going down the pub with the lads and that sort of stuff?
I didn't go to the pub.
You didn't?
No.
Did you not?
I never drank. I still don't drink anything ever before I ever play or do anything like this. I'm stone cold sober. Afterwards, all bets are off. But I would, in the beginning, I was fascinated by the pub. It's true, because Mark would talk about, I think the George was his favorite pub. And I thought, you know, English pub culture. But when I went there, I really didn't fit in. That was when I felt most alien. And I just found it depressing, so I stopped going to the pub. I didn't even like beer then, and I stayed at home and played with the cats and wrote songs.
I got a letter from Mark Smith around that time, which said, we're introducing Brix to pineapple fritters. Remember that? Which is like, you go, no, you don't. The awful chip shop thing.
Oh.
You throw a pineapple in,
No.
throw it in batter and you throw it in. I know it's disgusting. Yeah, and she says, but I like Brix because she monitors my drinking, and in brackets, good-naturedly. So I think that was a pretty...
Until I did.
Do you not remember the pineapple fritters?
No, I remember, that's really weird that you should bring that up. I remember not the pineapple fritters, but I do remember throwing up at least 3 times a week when I first moved here for a year, because the food was so different to American food, and we really did have a really terrible diet. So we did go to the chip shop. Well, he called it the Chinky, which I found quite disturbing. And he would have I would eat curry and chips with curry sauce. And sometimes there were sausages fried in batter, but there's so much grease I would puke, you know. So pineapple fritters, I'm sure. And then there was something called a butty, but not, but not like the kind where you put bread and butter and like crisps on it, but like a potato, like a butty. Am I like making this up? Something like a ball of something deep fried?
Yeah.
Who knows what I'm talking about?
Potato fritter.
Is it? Potato. It's like a scallop! Yes, that's it. A scallop. Yeah, something like that. That was just sinful. Yeah. What?
The Manchester diet is travel carbs.
Yeah.
Did you
And beer to wash it down. Yeah.
introduce Californian eating into the Smith household?
That's a good question. I did. I remember saying, "Oh my God, let's get an avocado. I'll make guacamole." But he didn't know what an avocado was. So I introduced an avocado to him.
Found a green roast there.
Eventually, I think I went to Saint Tesco, so one of them, somewhere in the Prestwich precinct.
In terms of music, now looking back on the fall, gosh, it's vast canon of music. It goes on forever. Pretty much the golden era, though. You came in and lightened the band somehow. Was this just accidental, or did you know what you're doing, or did Mark know what you're doing? Or?
I think Mark knew in the beginning. I think Mark, I have to credit him because it was all down to him that I was in it. I certainly wasn't my idea, but he knew that the band, that maybe he loved to change things up and create chaos, you know. But I think he really loved the way I wrote and played, and just thought it would be such an interesting dynamic. I was young and relatively insecure, although weirdly I believed in myself in one way. I mean, God, I left my own country and followed my dreams, but at the same time it was all pretty daunting. So I trusted him, and he encouraged me, and he was very supportive of me being in the band, and he stood up for me. And consequently, people say that's one of the best eras ever. It's certainly the most commercially successful era.
I think most folk fans would agree that like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 albums, you lifted them and you put them in the charts too. I don't think the four would have got in the charts if you had not joined them.
I don't think so either.
Did they want to?
Yeah, oh they did. I mean, they really did.
They did. I mean, did they see? I mean, it's a strange era, wasn't it? Because there was the underground band, and you had to move from that to a band that has a hit that gets in. It had to somehow do that, and you helped them do that. I mean,
but without you know, you know, with their integrity intact, they had to do it. They had to do it on their own terms, you know, without compromising. But for me, I was so furious when I hear music that the Fall was making, things like Creep, you know, that for me should have been in the charts anyway. Creep was. No, I was on Creep, but even before that, there were things that should have been in the Totally Wired. Should have been Hello, you know, top 10. This brilliant song.
I totally agree. How did you write songs with Mark? How did it work?
Generally, I would write the skeleton of the song on the guitar. So I would write all the chords and all the sections of the song and play it to him. And then he would rifle through a pile of paper on the ground and pull up some obscure lyric that was written God knows when, and it would be the absolute perfect lyric for it. Or sometimes I'd come with the song and a name of the song, like in the case of Terry Waite Says or 2x4, where it was really fully formed in my head, and then he would add his stuff on top of it, and then we'd take it into the rehearsal room and everybody would collaborate.
Did you sense that Mark had already written lyrics for songs that you had not yet written yet?
It's only after the fact that I realized it was so like perfectly fated and meant to be that had actually happened.
Oh, yeah, you mentioned Terry
Quite
Waite.
magical.
You mentioned Terry Waite Says there, which was written before the big Terry Waite story broke. I mean, that happened a few times before, didn't it?
A lot of times. I mean, Mark is a psychic medium, and he's a precognitive psychic, which means that he gets snatches of things that are going to come to pass, and in many, many songs, he's predicted it without even knowing what was going to happen. And in a way, I also have that intuition. So for me, Terry Waite Says, I wrote this song and I said it has to be called Terry Waite Says, it has to be called Terry Waite Says, and I wouldn't move from that. And then sure enough, the song came out, Terry Waite got kidnapped, and then his family was calling the record company to get the lyrics to the song because possibly it held like a psychic clue as to where he was being held.
You also wrote Powder Keg in the same.
I also wrote Powder Keg.
You wrote that?
I wrote Powder Keg, and I was uncredited. That was the second time I came back to the fall. So I wrote Powder Keg, and then there was the bombing here.
Mm-hmm. Now, I remember, because we've only got about 3 minutes left, and I remember you came back to the fall the second time in 1990. 2000, when was it? When was it? It came out as a middle class revolt time.
I think it was like 94.
Yeah, it must have been around. Now, they weren't really going through a great period at that point, were they? And you came back to it. I mean, how difficult was that for you?
It was hideous.
Was it?
It was hideous. But basically, right around that time, so I had a whole bunch of shit had happened. I'd lost everything, moved back to America, was like living in a garage, working as a waitress. But very slowly, Susanna Hoffs from the Bangles asked me to come and play with her. And then Courtney Love asked me. So I was back on the road doing stuff. And then Mark Smith got in touch through various ways and said, please come back. Please come back, we need you, we need you. And I thought, I'll go back not as his wife, but as a guitar player and a songwriter in my own right, and I wouldn't have to put up with the shenanigans anymore, and I would go back and do what I do best. So I went back, but it wasn't, they weren't as when I had left them, and they had really deteriorated on many different levels, and they weren't playing gigs for the fees they were. The buses had gone from luxury buses to like little vans, and the venues had gone from big to small, medium, and it was all deterioration, and it was very, very, very difficult.
What do you think of the fall? Because we're going to have to finish now. About a minute left. And do you still keep up with the fall nowadays?
Absolutely not.
You don't know as to
Nothing. I don't care. I think once in a while, like I had to go on. Was it Round Table? I had to go on some radio show where I had to hear one of their singles. It was pretty good. It was okay. But I totally moved on in my mind. I don't, if something comes, I won't, I'm a non-judgmental person. Like Mark Smith has every right to live his life the way he sees fit. He can do whatever he wants. I'm so not going to judge him for it. And if something comes at me and I hear it and it's truly good, I'll give it complete credit, but I don't go seeking it out. I have to say that sometimes listening to his voice still has the ability to upset me. Just because we were so close once and we're not anymore.
Yeah, of course.
But I don't even want to be, so it's okay.
Okay.
I'm happy.
We're going to finish there. We're going to play some songs now, aren't you? You're going to play some songs from Extricated.
Yes, no, we're not playing any extricated songs actually.
Okay.
So sometimes, once in a while, I'll do a reading, and then I'll bring out an acoustic guitar and sing some songs that relate back to the book. And I've only ever done this with Steve Trafford twice. It's quite special. So this is Steve Trafford, who also was in the fall, and is with me in Brix Smith Start. Somebody, a really awful thing happened a few weeks ago. My neighbor, one door down the line, put on a dry cleaning bag, a white dry cleaning bag on the front of his body and back of his body, and a pair of white angel wings, and jumped off the roof of our building. And I was seriously disturbed by this, as anyone would be. It happened at 7 in the morning. And about 2 days later, this song came through. So I've never played it before, and it's called Down the Line.